It wasn't like we immediately swapped Instagram accounts, then judged each other's cool factor on the follow count, the likes, the posy photos. When you went away on holiday in 1998, you could be anyone you wanted, and no one would ever know you were lying. This year, something was different. That something was Taran. The thing is, it wasn't just the she wore that made Taran so earth-stoppingly cool. It was simply being Taran. Every breath she drew was cool. Taran was the first person I'd ever met to just fucking possess it. Taran was the magic girl. So it has been a really, really long time since I have recorded a storytime video, and I have had so many requests recently for storytime videos about growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s with the goth scene and the eating disorder forum and just generally the 90s. And so many people have started saying, you should start writing this down. You should do a writing project about all of these memories. You should write a book about all of these memories. And while it seems really weird to me still that the 90s and the early 2000s is that long ago that people regard it as nostalgic, because to me it still feels like about 10 years ago tops. It doesn't feel like that long ago. But nonetheless, I really do enjoy going back into cool memories, even miserable memories, and just like reliving them and thinking, wow, like how much have things changed and all of that. So I have started splurging out some memories, and I thought I would give you a story time about the 90s when I was 13 years old, and the first time I had something that I considered the wildest night of my life. And when you're 13... it's quite funny what you consider the wildest night of your life, but nonetheless, I thought it turned into kind of a fun story, so I wanted to read it to you. And I don't think I've ever actually read you anything autobiographical before, so this will be interesting. It's been a minute since I've read anything to you at all. I haven't really given it a title yet, so its working title is just Taran, who is one of the characters of this story, one of the people in this story, the first magic girl I ever met. The first person I ever met who just made me realize that cool is not something that you carefully craft. It's not something that is given to you by other people. Cool is something that some people just have. And when you meet these people, you are hypnotized. And Taran was the first person I met who made me realize that, so I wanted to kind of dedicate this story to her, whoever she is now and wherever she is in the world. So anyway, this story is called Taran. Here we go. Do you remember the wildest night of your life? I hope it was recent. I hope it was yesterday. And I hope it comes again next week or next month, instead of being a fading flare shot of some distant triumph, waning like a dying star in the rearview mirror of times past. But for many people, the 90s, the early 2000s, they were those times, and for a while I was one of them. It was over. It was gone. I think that's why you asked me to write this thing, a mantra of madness and things dead, a steaming gumbo pot clusterfuck of insanity, trip pants, ecstasy pills and glow sticks, swelled with teenage lust and the lonesome misery that consumed teenage life before the sound came along and changed everything. You know the sound, don't you? It was beautiful once you got past its hard edges, its rough industrial buzz. Dude, what fucking band are you talking about? Which one is so classic? Which one started it all? Industrial? What the fuck? No, not a band. Not some pivotal moment in the progression of goth. I never gave a fuck about musical history. I'm talking about the sound. Maybe you've never even heard it, not once. Maybe you came after the sound. But it went beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, beep, beep. Like a robot alien speaking another language, and it really was. It was your computer talking to its satellite overlords. It was the sound of the early internet, and as harsh as it sounded, its effect on the timeline of history was even sharper. It sliced the world in half, the times before and the times after. The people that came after the sound, its prehistoric world fascinates them. So here I am to drag you around, shy little fetus person, to drag you around in the muck and moonlight of my memories. Keep moving, don't get stuck in the quagmire, it's everywhere. Have your own regrets, but don't make one of them thinking you were born in the wrong time, too late. Too late for the sound and the glorious moody isolation, the grainy film camera shots of grinning, overexposed goths who looked younger than anyone looks these days. If this is your regret, take these memories and birth them anew. Make a new scene. Do a new thing. Will the restrictions of COVID make it for us? Over a year locked in our bedrooms, will we finally want to go out again? To go out at any cost, anxiety and shyness and nothing to wear be fucking damned? Will we finally make a new scene? I hope so. But for now, as lockdown rolls on, I guess it's the perfect time to travel somewhere else, the only way we still can, in our minds. So back we go to the wildest night of my life. Or, well, it was once, a long, long time ago, before I grew up, before they kept on happening to me. Just as they should. Just as they fucking should. When the wildest nights of my life are over, I don't know what comes next. Truthfully, though, I think it's always just a pause, a break. Something, someone will always come along and love you and sweep you up in mystery and magic and madness, even if it happens in the next life. For now, though, for this story, we all have to start somewhere. I started when I was 13 years old. The bar for wildest night ever was pretty low at that age, at that point. But that's still the way I remember it. Sitting in a grotty bathroom stall, grinning madly and thinking, this is the wildest night of my life. I was a lanky kid with straight, awkward brown hair down to my bum, genderqueer before there was a word for it. I wanted to be Liam Gallagher, unsmiling and balls out swaggery, uncaring about style, about appearance, too cool to give a shit about any of it, so I just never cut my hair and it grew and grew. Given I was also the bullied kid, the roundly despised shit bin for every random asshole's hatred and bile, it also made a convenient curtain to hide behind. First mistake, never hide. Never hunch over and act shy. You just put a big target on your back, and no matter how far you run, you'll always be the bullied kid. But for 1 week a year, I got to escape all that. My bullies, my shitty little hometown, my parents, divorced, one in the shithole, the other in London, which I despised as a concrete jungle bereft of soul and would later despise for being a sea of opportunities stolen from me. And most of all, school. That infernal prison of souls designed to stub you out like a smouldering cigarette. Everything interesting and unique and sharp-edged and glittering, ground to dust between the yellowed, aging fingers of teachers who'd ceased giving a shit long before you were even born. This week, this one fucking week that I counted down the days, hell the hours to all year, it took me to the gorgeous Tolkien-sounding nowhere land of Dollal, Llandrindod, Wales. And it really was a nowhere land. You'll be lucky to find it on any map. The road would peter out into bleak, tufty bogs and marshes and an endless unfurling moorland beneath a steel-grey sky, gloomy mountains rearing up in the distance, sheep scattered here and there, skeletons of sheep not far behind, bones picked clean as a whistle by God knows what, and just when you thought God had forsaken you and you'd never find your way there or home or anywhere but this nowhere land ever again, there it was. It was a rickety wooden sign with a great big heart carved on it, and whenever I saw it, my own heart would go into overdrive. I'd press myself against the window of our lumbering Renault Espace and squint out for the very first sign of the only thing in my life that really mattered, the only thing that shone like a fucking star in those grim, godless school days. Pea Brain. Pea Brain was a horse. A pony, really, I suppose. Not what you were expecting, I suspect. But like I said, we all have to start somewhere when it comes to the wildest night of your life. And the thing about this nowhere land was that they brought you, then they dumped you. 30 or so kids abandoned in butthole nowhere, a damp little wooden shed shivering under that vast steel grey sky. All of us under the supervision of just 3 adults, most notably the chain-smoking, wheezing, butch lesbian powerhouse of Billy, who taught cantering by suggesting you pretend you were shagging the saddle with every beat of the hooves, or, or the tall, lanky young point-to-point rider Mark, who every girl over 13 believed she fancied the fuck out of, purely due to the absolute overload of estrogen in the room, and Pea Brain. She wasn't just a pony, not to me then. Pea Brain was an Arab. And one of my first autistic obsessions was the classic 90s horsey literature, Ginny Manders. Ginny had long fuck-it-all hair, just like mine, was skinny and antisocial, like me, and lived with a hippie called Ken who came out with weird madness about thanking the plates after you ate from them. Ginny's whole family had ditched their sensible, boring jobs in her equally soul-crushing hometown, and then they just fucked right off to the wilds of Scotland, where she rescued a wild chestnut Arab from a murderous circus and spent her life soaring around that stunning Highland nowhere land on her beautiful, impossible freedom wagon of an animal. Shanty. She didn't care about friends or school or other humans, perhaps a bit autistic. All Ginny wanted was the silence of the moors and the strong beat of her crazy horse's hooves beneath her. Ginny and Shanty were absolutely my teenage Aspie obsession. I didn't understand why I couldn't convince my own family to do the same, to just ditch their entire lives in this miserable suburban shithole and fuck off to somewhere with a sky as high and wide as the heavens, where the British rain thundered down on moorlands and rough grey seas, where horses lived in ramshackle stables at the back of your cottage, and you were free, truly, truly free. Sometimes I wonder to this day, what would have happened if my family had actually been mad enough to do it? There aren't any drugs in a nowhere land like that. Who would I be in that life? But I suppose that's all academic now. Pea Brain was grey, not chestnut, but she was still an Arab, with the same fine silken coat, the same delicate fluted face, vast limpid pools of black liquid eyes fringed in long white lashes, and the same wild nature. I adored her. But the wildest night had little to do with Pea Brain, bar the fact that I was almost never bullied in Dollau, and she was the reason. We didn't have names there. Too many kids to fucking remember. They just called me Pea Brain's rider, and I wanted nothing more in the entire world than to be just that. It had taken me 2 entire fucking years to even tame that horse enough to get on her back without an immediate explosion of rearing, followed by the instant demotion to a lumpish plod named Sandy. Being Pea Brain's rider came easily to no one, and all the other girls knew it. So I wasn't the shit bin there, the untouchable, the bullied kid. For the first time in my life, I had status. I was 13 that year, my 3rd visit. We slept in 8-girl dorms that smelled of horse sweat, creeping damp, and 90s vanilla impulse body spray. Whenever we weren't with the horses, we were poring over teen magazines, doing quizzes to find out if our pets really liked us, or if boys thought we were cool, or sexy, or sad. Sad in those days meaning the equivalent of lame, rather than its recent elevation to a weird supposed cool of Lana Del Rey's Sad Girls Club. Maybe remember that next time you pair the sad girl badge with 90s chic. Anyway, and now and then the older girls would bring us a Cosmopolitan mag, and we would ew in unison at the blowjob tips. "Suck his bollocks," said 90s Cosmo. Oh, there was even a drawing, and they were very, very hairy. To this day, the idea of sucking a hairy bollock and feeling the fur of some bloke's sweaty pubes dragging across my tongue is gag-inducingly grim. So thanks, Cosmo. Even in 1998, you were scraping the sexual barrel. But this year, something was different. That something was Taran. Taran was a girl, really. Just some random girl our age, perhaps a year older than I was, but Taran was the first person I'd ever met to just fucking possess it. Taran was the magic girl. She had this inexplicable, undeniable charisma in spades, and everyone could see it. Taran dripped 90s cool, from her orange Helly Hansen puffer jacket, to her black and white popper Adidas trousers, to her effortlessly perfect face with its upturned nose and overplucked 90s brows, and a long, thick, gleaming swing of jet black hair. Taran smoked, of course, what cool kid didn't, despite having asthma, and like me, Taran rode a status machine. Her given horse was Quizzer, a show pony every bit as gleaming obsidian as Taran's hair, his face almost Arabian, his neck a thickly curved arch of stallion-like crest, his movement a gliding, flying showboat you couldn't help but stare at, breathless, and on the left-hand side of his neck sprouted a football-sized cancerous tumour that was the only reason he was battering around this place instead of prancing across the arena at Wembley Horse Show. 1998 had a sound too. It wasn't the internet. Not yet. The internet was barely a thing at all. And that meant that none of us arrived in Dolau with any kind of pre-existing status or backstory. It wasn't like we immediately swapped Instagram accounts, then judged each other's cool factor on the follow account, the likes, the posy photos. We couldn't show each other phones full of boyfriends, girlfriends, ponies, dogs, clothes. When you went away on holiday in 1998, you could be anyone you wanted, and no one would ever know you were lying. People took each other on face value. What else was there? In retrospect, I regret not being a compulsive liar, a new person everywhere I went. That level of wild anonymity is long dead to almost all of us now. But the sound of 1998, it was Run DMC versus Jason Nevins. It's like that. You couldn't move an inch without hearing it for weeks on end, back in the days of Top of the Pops on a Friday night, and the full Top 40 chart on the radio on a Sunday, to be sneakily recorded onto cassette tape, then mutated into an arduously crafted mix with your double cassette player. I doubt anyone even remembers how to use those things now, including myself, but I still remember the way the buttons felt, the euphoria of hitting the bass boost button at precisely the moment the beat dropped, then yanking the volume up at the same time, just to show the babysitter in the next room precisely how cool you were. And that track, it had a bass line like the thunder of God. It was something no one on earth had ever heard before. It shook the fucking house, no matter how cruddy the radio it was played on. And if you've never heard it here, now, in the 2020s, then something has gone horribly wrong with this world. That track was the anthem of our evenings, sitting on the damp-smelling floor in muddy-ass jodhpurs, and the wild new thing entering my life was cigarettes. Well, like I said, we all have to start somewhere. The older girls smoked, and I'd always wanted to try it. Why? Well, don't be stupid. Why does anyone start smoking? That loathsome, reeking habit that kills you without even getting you high. What is the point of a cigarette? People start because they think it looks cool. Besides, Liam Gallagher smoked. Hell, he even had a song called Cigarettes and Alcohol. My parents didn't give a fuck if I drank in the house, which automatically made booze completely uninteresting. Well played, parents. But cigarettes would make my mother hit the roof, and that automatically made them total cool bait. Perhaps even more importantly than Liam, though, in that moment, Taran smoked. The thing is, it wasn't just the shit she wore or even the horse she rode that made Taran so earth-stoppingly cool. It was simply being Taran. Every breath she drew was cool. Was it the balls-out rebelliousness of going through an asthma attack completely unfazed, then lighting up another cigarette with a laugh and a toss of her glistening black hair? Was it the conversation about her fears regarding her dad threatening to drug test her because Taran smoked drugs, not just cigarettes? Holy fucking shit. I don't think so. It was simply the air, the goddamn aura of Taranness she wore. These days, most of the rare, sparkling magic people naturally draped in this mantle of cool are online celebrities. You don't just meet them and notice it like they're this beacon of light in a random room full of random strangers. People these days probably think cool is a carefully crafted thing, or else something handed to people by their fucking follow accounts. Listen to me. You can't cancel that type of celebrity. You can't cancel those Bowie-esque people whose cool just oozes from the marrows of their bones and expect the world to listen. When you have cool dripping from every internal organ, people will always follow you. So right now, I'd bet that just like I was back in 1998, you're wondering whether you ever seem like that to anyone, ever. Whether you're one of the magic people, even just a little bit. Who knows? Cool is perhaps the most ephemeral, uncontainable substance on Earth. I suspect that Taran got knocked up in her late teens, that the smoking and rebellion wreaked merry hell on her skin, voice and gleaming hair, and that no one thinks she's remotely cool anymore, in her late 30s now, probably a mother to boot. I doubt she's the wild, reckless, beautiful fireball she was then. But who knows, she could be dead by now. This was 1998. When people left Dolau, they disappeared forever. Taran's cool factor was a brief, ruby-bright highlight flashing across the darkened sky of my youth, never to be seen again. The contraband cigarettes had been smuggled in by the older girls, who would climb out of the window of our little hut into the cold, fog-dripping air, a wooden fence cutting us off from the grazing horses. The bleak, undulating bleating of the sheep just never stopped, not even in the night, and you judged the grimness of the weather by how many mountains you could see beyond the ominous spread of the moorlands, always purplish-grey with the gloom of the sky. But despite the gothic gloom of its dreamlike qualities, no place ever felt so alive, so awake as Dolau. The air was different, sharper. It should have been a rehab facility. And who knows, maybe these days it is. Little trace of that place still exists in 2020, in all my online searching. And every horse I ever knew there is long dead, even Pea Brain. Certainly the cancer-riddled quizzer. As the older girls smoked beyond the window, then hauled themselves back in to drench the fag smoke out of their clothes with sickly poison blasts of impulse body spray, they talked constantly about the pressing necessity of restocking the fags. The British-American divide on this word causes endless hilarity. A friend on holiday in Chicago once commented, offhand, that he could murder a fag right now, only to have his trip partner sit up straighter, eyes like soup plates, and inform him, "James, we will not have that kind of attitude here." He had to explain that he wasn't about to go out and queer bash some poor kid to death in an out-of-the-blue flash of violence. It was just our expression for a dirty cigarette craving. So the fags had to be restocked. But who did we have that looked old enough to pass for 16 when we were going to the shops on Wednesday? If we ran out of fags, they repeated over and over, they were going to fucking die. Finally came the soaring, magnificent day that they let me try a cigarette. But just like the first time anyone smokes anything, I took the tiniest sip, tasted it with my tongue tip, didn't inhale deeper, and still found it fairly repulsive. But there it was. I'd done it now. I'd started smoking. I was one blackened lung closer to Taran magic. That had to be at least 50 cool points in the bag, by the standards of a Sugar magazine cool quiz. However, now I was a smoker, it left me with a goddamn difficult dilemma. If you gain cool points on holiday, but don't bring them back home, do they even count at all? I had to go home and be seen to smoke there, on the way to school, like the actually cool kids did, or, realistically, looking back, the piece of shit asshole brats who weren't even worth a moment of anyone's time, let alone the health of my lungs. But there you go, there were limited ways to be cool in 1998. But the thing was, everyone and their mother in Dolau were concerned with getting served, restocking the fags, and there was no way someone would ever think I was 16. And so it was that after much nervous sweating and fretting over this faggy dilemma, I crept into an older girl's bag and stole one of her cigarettes. I mean, just one wouldn't be noticed, right? They still had about 12. That cigarette lingered in my own bag, burning a hole in my nervous system composed of terror and excitement in equal measure. A whole cigarette, all of my own, to smoke back home in front of other people, looking cool as fuck for once. After about 20 minutes, however, an inexplicable wave of sheer terror propelled me back to the room to hastily return the stolen fag, which turned out to be the best decision of my short little life. When the cigarettes came out shortly afterwards, I discovered they knew the exact count of fags that pack possessed, and in this estrogen-saturated nowhere land, the drama ran high. No amount of Pea Brains would have saved me from the vitriol and scorn if I'd been discovered as a fag thief, particularly when I didn't even smoke properly and couldn't plead that cool withdrawal symptoms of my cool nicotine addiction had turned me temporarily psychotic. But the wildest night, that came later. Like all the best wild times, no one arranged it. No one tried to force the insanity or round up the fun. It was a happening. Taran, of course, brought the music. She had a little battered black cassette player, the kind plumbers and electricians used to tote around to have music on the job, and just one mixtape. But all we really listened to was Run DMC, that bass line throbbing out in the cold, dripping air. Evening fell, then total darkness, and I learned for the first time that cigarettes had an extra layer of cool. They glowed in the dark. Beneath the black sky of that nowhere land, only a faint light drifting through the faded, fluttering curtains of our window. You could hardly see people at all unless they were smoking, just glowing orange dots floating from hand to mouth and back again as the speaker boomed and boomed out in the darkness. That was when I asked to try some more of the cigarette, and this time my tutor laughed, told me to take it back properly. "Look," she said, demonstrating, her face a pale smudge in the darkness. "You suck, then you take it out of your mouth and you inhale really deep. Do it, go." So I did. I sucked hard on the weird, damp tube that had been in about 1,000 mouths, filled my own mouth with smoke, and sucked it all down deep with a big, clean lungful of Welsh air. It burned and scalded and tasted like fucking shit, but I didn't cough. I wouldn't let myself cough, so determined to look like I was a goddamn natural at this. But immediately my head was spinning with nicotine and poison, and the taste, dear God, the taste of that noxious shit in my overly sensitised aspy taste buds. It was like someone had set fire to a mountain of tyres, then I'd stuck my head into the belching clouds of burning rubber and licked it. No amount of blackcurrant squash seemed to wash it from the scalded membranes of my mouth, but I told myself I liked it. And as the stars and sheep and the glowing orange cherries spun with weird dizziness, the bass throbbing all the way to the distant mountains, I felt more a part of things than perhaps I ever had in my life. Until my body, like almost everyone's, the first time they consciously poison it with the monster nicotine, decided it was about to throw up. Violently, and right now. I clambered hastily back through the window, still trying very, very hard to look normal, fine, and ultimately cool, and made my rapid way to the grotty little bathrooms, which were always ice cold and full of daddy longlegs crane flies stumbling horrifically about. And then I sat on the floor in front of the toilet with the nausea slicing through me like a knife until I was literally praying to a God I didn't even believe in that if he would just make it all go away without puking, don't let me puke, please, please don't let me puke, I would never, never, ever, ever, ever smoke a cigarette again, which clearly was a complete lie, but it didn't feel like a lie in that moment. I was severely emetophobic and would have done anything on earth right then to just not puke. Little by little, in the cold, damp bathroom, silent but for a distant dripping tap, the nausea subsided, and finally back I went to the smoke and bass and euphoria, having emerged victorious from my secret trial by fire, My mouth still tasted reeking of burnt rubber, and it was then that I thought, wow, this is the wildest night of my life. Everyone was young and cool and covered in smoke stink. Taran was the centre of the fucking universe, and the music went on in the darkness. And though the adults probably knew, it wasn't enough to care. And most of all, I wasn't the bullied kid. I was Pea Brain's rider. I was a smoker now. And this, I felt in the very marrows of my bones, was my very first taste of a whole new life. The very first lick of a delicious, illicit ice cream cake of drugs and rebellion and moonlit mischief. That cigarette, damp with the priceless potion of Taran's spit, marked the ending of my miserable, pointless childhood and the birth of my wild, unbridled adult life. So, whoever you are now, Taran, dead or alive, addict or high flyer, wherever you might be, God bless you for letting the sad, weird ones be a part of your in-crowd, even for one short, explosive night. You had magic in every finger. I hope you kept it. And that's the first chapter, I guess, of my nostalgic waffling. So yeah, everyone has to start somewhere. And yeah, when you're 13 and the bullied kid, just trying a cigarette and getting buzzed on nicotine is enough. You know, in the darkness with other kids who are actually letting you be a part of things. It felt like this is the beginning of everything, even though it would be some time before really my life started. When you're a bullied kid, you know, you don't get to have these magic fun times with people at home. In the 90s, as I say, you went on holiday and nobody knew who you were. You could be anyone. You could tell people you had a different name. You could make up some whole backstory about your family. If you were a kid like this on holiday with no parents, you could tell people you had 6 sisters when you didn't. You could tell people that you had a horse when you didn't. You could tell people that you were like the coolest kid in school. No one would know any different. So I went to this place a whole bunch of times, and there was only 1 year that I got bullied, and I think that was because I had the most rotten cold and I couldn't speak without clearing my throat about 1,000 times and getting like all the phlegm out the way, and it was super gross, and I got bullied that year. But every other time it was totally chill, and I got to, even though I wasn't a compulsive liar and I didn't make up lies, I did get to be one of the cool kids. I got to pretend to be one of the cool kids because nobody knew my backstory. Nobody knew the stigma that I carried around with me everywhere I went. And eventually that was what I did with the goth scene, was just traveling out of town into the city, meeting a whole new load of people. And at the goth clubs, it was the same thing. It was, nobody knows you here. Nobody knows your reputation here. You can dress up and you can go out on your own and you can be anyone. And and I kind of missed that, honestly, a little bit about doing YouTube. That, like I've said before, if you're kind of a goth YouTuber, you go most places, no one knows who the fuck you are, and it's cool. But you go to a goth club and it's pretty much guaranteed someone's going to know who you are, which is lovely. Like, you make a new friend, but you don't get that complete anonymity anymore. You don't get to just go, I feel like, to a goth club almost anywhere. And just be someone else, and just, if you feel like making up a totally different name for yourself, then you tell someone that you're called Obsidian Widow. And, you know, you go there and you be someone else, and you pretend that you're a professional dominatrix, and whatever you like, you be whoever you want to be. And you know, I've lost that, but honestly I feel like almost everyone has lost that. Immediately it's like, well, let's swap social media, and then boom, your real name, your real personality, or your friends, everything is there. And it's so much harder to escape who you are these days. And but anyway, there's lots more to say about lots of things, and I enjoyed reading this out. Hope you guys tolerated listening to not the coolest story I have. Everyone has to start somewhere, and I don't know, this seemed like a good starting place for writing about it. And the internet, it did draw such a big line in the sand in my life and in everyone's lives and in the world. So I wanted to tell at least one story from before the internet came along. And I have a lot to talk about regarding the early internet, and obviously the eating disorder forum and all of that. And my first forays out to goth clubs, and first boyfriends and things like that. But I wanted to tell one story that just belonged to kind of sad little sad little brown-haired me, who I honestly barely remember being and don't really relate to as a person at all. Like, it's hard for me to think that was me in any way because we're so different to each other in every way. So give it a like and a subscribe and all of that if you liked it, and I will give you more, and it will get more gothy as we go along, obviously. 13-year-old me was alternative but was more of a hippie than a goth, really. So anyway, let me know if you ever went on riding holidays in Wales. This place was called the Heart of Wales Riding School or something like that. The Heart of Wales, anyway. If you know anyone who ever went there on holiday as a teenager, I would love to know about it. And if you know a girl called Taran who has or naturally had dark brown to black hair, little upturned nose, cute as a button, dark eyes, asthma, would be about 36, 37, 38 by now, I would think. If you know anyone who fits that description, then maybe she's the Taran, maybe she is, but I do wonder what happened to that girl. Like, you know, she was really rebellious. Did she go down this kind of not so good path? Did she end up struggling with addiction issues and stuff like that like I did? Or, you know, did she get knocked up the other way that rebellious teens in the 90s tended to go? Did she get knocked up and end up having to settle down and have a kid? And actually, these days she's got like a grown-up kid and she's working her own business. And like, I don't know, she could have gone in any direction. Like I say, she could be dead. This was the thing. You lost touch with everyone. So you got to be this imaginary character for a week, and then that was it. You would have pen pals sometimes if you really got on with another girl. You'd take their address, not usually their phone number. That's the weird thing. We rarely chatted on the phone with each other. We became pen pals, and we would send just written letters to each other, sometimes like pictures of things, but not very often pictures because it was film cameras and, you know, you had to get them processed and developed and all the rest of it. But anyway, oh my goodness, this is long, so I'm going to shut up. If you enjoyed this, I do actually have a book of short stories out on Amazon. It is called The Putrescent Vein. There's always a link down below in the description box, but if you just search Amazon for The Putrescent Vein, you will get my book of short stories. It's not autobiographical though. It's kind of gory vampire horror stories and things like that. So that came out in 2018. I'm kind of overdue for putting together another one, but if you enjoyed any of this, you might enjoy some of that too, possibly. So maybe look it up. And this is long as fuck, so I'm going to shut up now. So thanks for listening. Over and out. Bye bye.